Uh, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Riaz Ahmed, editor of Social Change. Launched by the Council for Social Development in 1971 and now published by SAGE, Social Change is in the 55th year of its publication. The Social Change Annual Lecture Series is a CSD IIC SAGE collaboration. Thank you for joining us today on the occasion of the 7th Social Change Annual Lecture, which is to be delivered by eminent educationist Professor Krishna Kumar on a very exciting theme, social change as an object of educational inquiry. Our president, CSD's president, K. Srinath Reddy, eminent cardiologist and founder president of Public Health Foundation of India, unfortunately could not join us. He is out of the station, but he has sent his best wishes for the lecture and has also sent his greetings to Professor Krishna Kumar. I'll very briefly introduce the dignitaries on the dais and say a few words about the Social Change Annual Lecture Series. Let me talk about Professor Krishna Kumar first. A Padma Shri awarded by the President of India and an honorary D.Litt given by the University of London are only two examples of how Professor Krishna Kumar's academic excellence has been acknowledged in India and abroad. He is a highly celebrated scholar, and I leave his fuller introduction to the chair of the event, Professor Biswajit Dhar. Professor Dhar, Vice President and a distinguished professor at the Council for Social Development, is a noted economist. Apart from being a professor at GNU, he has been the director. He has been the Director General of the Research and Information Systems for Developing Countries, head of the Center for WTO Studies, a senior consultant in the Planning Commission of India, a member of Indian delegation in many multilateral treaty negotiations, and a consultant to several intergovernmental organizations. We are honored to have with us Ms. Smriti Sudhakaran, Senior Marketing Manager at SAGE India. Ms. Sudhakaran bridges the gap between scholarly research and its audience. She drives the marketing of SAGE journals, books, and digital resources, empowering researchers, educators, and students globally. We also have on the dais CSD Director Professor Nityananda. He is an economist and a policy analyst with experience in research, consultancy, and teaching. Before I leave the podium, please allow me to say a few words about the Social Change Annual Lecture Series, which began in 2019. Manoranjan Mohanty, who was then the editor of Social Change, and Muchkund Dubey, who was then the CSD president, conceived this event as a part of the Golden Jubilee celebrations of social change. They succeeded in bringing on board IIC and SAGE, whose unwavering support has carried the lecture series uninterrupted. By the time I took over as editor, lectures by eminent academics Gopal Guru, Uma Chakravarti, and G.N. Devi had already been held. Subsequently, Social Change succeeded in having other distinguished guest speakers, such as Beena Agarwal, Madhav Gadgil, Barbara Harris-White, and now Professor Krishna Kumar. You might have seen a pattern in the names. It's a matter of great satisfaction that Social Change has succeeded in having a woman guest speaker every alternate year. There is no doubt that the credibility this annual lecture enjoys today is largely due to the names of the guest speakers and their topics. But it is also important to accept that the CSD, IIC, SAGE collaboration has been instrumental in providing the means to hold the lecture series regularly. Perhaps what binds these together is that these are sites of informal pedagogy. All these are engaged in one way or the other in production, dissemination, and reproduction of knowledge. As editor social change and as a CSD team member, I gratefully acknowledge the support received from IIC and SAGE all these years. And I also look forward to receiving it in future too. In conclusion, as an expression of my gratitude to SAGE and IIC, I turn to famous Urdu poet Majruh. मुझे सहल हो गई मंजिलें, वो हवा के रुख भी बदल गए, तेरा हाथ हाथ में आ गया कि चिराग राह में जल गए. A loose transliteration of this would be, my destination drew closer. Even the winds changed their course. The path lit up with lamps when my hand held yours. I request the events chair, Professor Biswajit Dhar, to take us through the program now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Riaz Ahmed. It's an honor for me to chair this evening's session. And let me first invite Professor Nityananda, the Director of CLT, to give us that welcome address.
Thank you, Professor Biswajit Dhar, our Vice President and Chair of the session. Professor Krishna Kumar, our eminent guest speaker of this day. Professor Riaz Ahmed, and of course, Ms. Smriti Sudhakaran. Distinguished guests, my colleagues and friends. It is my great pleasure to extend you warm welcome on behalf of CSD, IIC, and SAGE Publications to this August event. This started 7 years back when social change completed 50 years. So it started as a Golden Jubilee lecture. It continues, so it was initially not planned like that, but then looking at the interest to this lecture, we decided that it should be continued, and it has become an annual event in the calendar of all three of us, CSD, SAGE, and IIC. And this time, this lecture is happening for the first time after we lost our former president, Professor Muchkund Dubey. And all of you might be knowing this subject of social change and education was very, very close to his heart. So this lecture comes as a fitting tribute to his memory, his work on education. And I'm also pleased to see that Professor Krishna Kumar has decided to customize his lecture to link education with social change. Of course, we all know that social change is the ultimate objective of education that we should have, though we kind of thought in many different considerations that it is a way to build your career, it's a way to get a government job, so that kind of thing. And I see, when I, as a social scientist, though education has not been my subject of interest or research, but as an economist with social concern, when I visit villages or many other, places with social implication, I see what is happening in different areas of social development, be it health or education. And I see that in rural areas, people are losing interest in education. So that makes me worried. And that makes me worried because if we are talking about social change and if today's youth are not getting interested in, education as a means of social change, then there must be something wrong. Or if they are thinking that if education is not going to get you a job, if education is not going to give you money, so what's the point of pursuing education? If that kind of thinking is going on, or we also often think about or talk about that our education is not cut out for the market. There might be some point in that, but should our education only be cut out for the market, or should our education have some broader objective, social change or empowerment of people? So if that is not happening, then of course people might lose interest because they were made to believe that education is to build your career, education is to get a government job. So that's why you have to look why that when we talk about education should be for social change, for empowerment, and students should go to school and for the pleasure of having the joy of learning, nothing else. If that is not happening, then all of us social scientists have to think what went wrong. And interestingly, I found it in rural areas that boys are losing interest, but girls are still not losing so much interest because they still possibly think that this is a means of empowerment because they are not empowered. In our patriarchal society, boys feel they're already empowered, so they don't need education to aim for empowerment. So what social change we will do if we do not instill this kind of consideration that education is not for getting job or getting a job in MNCs or government, even for any walks of life you want to choose, education is necessary. So I think that today's lecture will give us a direction to all of us social scientists, to the academician, education professionals, that how we use the social change, as the agenda of education and, kind of mold our education or academic curriculum in that direction and build a kind of awareness and a kind of consensus that this is our objective of education. So I once again thank you, Professor Krishna Kumar, for taking, responding to our invitation and agreeing to give this lecture. I thank you, Professor Dhar, Professor Riaz Ahmed for taking this initiative, and our partner, Smriti Sudhakaran, for, doing all that you have been doing, and of course, IIC for providing these facilities. I welcome you all, and I hope you will enjoy this lecture and we'll get back with a lot of food for thought. Thank you.
May I now invite Ms. Sudhakaran, State Publications.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of SAGE, I'm delighted to welcome you to the 7th Annual Social Change Lecture, featuring Professor Krishna Kumar, Padma Awardee, Honorary Professor at Punjab University, who will speak on social change as an object of educational inquiry. Launched in 2019, the Social Change Lecture has become a flagship event for SAGE, fostering meaningful discussion on social transformation. It serves as a vital platform, bringing together scholars and thought leaders to share diverse perspectives and insights on this crucial topic. For the past 16 years, SAGE has proudly collaborated with the Council for Social Development and the journal Social Change. Published quarterly, Social Change delves into ideas, policies, and practices that impact marginalized communities, with a strong focus on social development, health, education, and welfare. Under the leadership of Professor B.B. Mohanty, and now Professor Riaz Ahmed, the journal has maintained and expanded its academic influence. The journal recently celebrated its 54th volume in 2024, released its first issue of 2025 in March. With approximately 67,000 downloads globally last year, the journal enjoys widespread readership across United States, Western Europe, Asia, Australasia, the Middle East, and the United Kingdom, underscoring its global reach and impact. Indexed in Scopus since 2020, social change has shown consistent growth, achieving a site score of 1.1 in 2023. We are optimistic about maintaining this momentum with official 2024 site score expected in June this year. According to the Shimango Journal ranking, social change is currently categorized in quartile 3 across disciplines such as social sciences, sociology, and political sciences. We are pleased to announce that social change will expand its capacity in 2025, adding 100 additional pages to accommodate the growing number of high-quality publications. This growth reflects both the journal's rising prominence and the increasing engagement of its global community of scholars. As we gather today for today's lecture, we celebrate not only the journal's remarkable journey, but also its commitment to fostering meaningful dialogue about social change. Sage is also proud to publish Samajik Vimarsh, a Hindi language journal from CST, under the Sage Bhasha program, with an aim to strengthen the regional language publishing in India. Our partnership with CST has been a privilege, and we look forward to continuing this collaboration for many more years to come. Thank you. Let us enjoy this evening of impactful discussions and share commitment to progress.
Now my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Professor Krishna Kumar. Professor Krishna Kumar did his PhD in educational theory at the University of Toronto and taught during most of his career at Delhi University. He was the director of National Council of Educational Research and Training from 2004 to 10. At present, he is an honorary professor at Punjab University, Chandigarh. He was awarded an honorary D.Litt by the Institute of Education, University of London in 2011. The same year, he was awarded Padma Shri by the President of India. Professor Kumar has been a Jawaharlal Nehru Fellow, a visiting fellow at the Center for Oriental Studies, Berlin, and at the Center for Advanced Study of India, University of Pennsylvania. He has delivered numerous prestigious lectures, including the Gladwin Lecture in the British House of Lords, the G.P. Nayak Lecture at the Center for Women's Development Studies, New Delhi, the Maulana Azad Lecture at Kolkata, and the I.P. Desai Lecture at Surat. Among his various books, the best known are Politics of Education in Colonial India, Prejudice and Pride, Battle for Peace, Education, Conflict and Peace, What is Worth Teaching, and Smaller Citizens, Writings on the Making of Indian Citizens. He has edited several volumes, including the Routledge Handbook of Education in India, Debates, Practices and Policies. Several of his books are in Hindi. His latest book is Thank You Gandhi, published by Penguin Random House. It's our pleasure to welcome Professor Krishna Kumar. May I invite you to deliver the social change lecture?
Distinguished guests from different institutions of Delhi, friends. We are greatly honored to have been invited to deliver this on. I feel greatly honored to have been invited for this prestigious lecture of the Council for Social Development and Journal Social Change. For this evening, I have chosen the theme of making social change as an object of educational inquiry. When I say an object, I mean something slightly, you can say, different from how these two themes are normally discussed. Education is often treated as simply a means of social change. And rarely as either as a subject of inquiry or as a means of inquiry. And precisely that is what I wish to do with you today, hoping that education, when it's used as a lens to look at social change of the last century and a half in our society, will offer us some insight into where we have been, where we are, and where we are now going. Education is a very complex lens to look at, and we will look through, and we will work on that. Many years ago, a student in my class asked this question. It was the late 1980s at that time. Her question was, sir, 100 years later, will this period be seen with the help of this word modern and modernization? The question strikes me to this day as a question full of nuances and layers of meaning. And the fact that it struck this student as a good question to ask at the time that she asked it itself is a bit of intriguing subject of historical inquiry. The late was a very sensitive period in our history. There had been these terrible riots against the Sikhs in Delhi and the whole of India, something that one had not imagined before. But politics of identity was growing on a much larger scale. The Ram Janambhoomi movement was in the offing, and within a few years, it led to something that people of my generation certainly had not imagined seeing in our lifetime. So seen from the point of view of that question, it seems as if this word modern and its two variations, modernity and modernization, require considerable consideration and inquiry about what they mean when they are used in the context of social change. There is no doubt that throughout the freedom struggle, India was striving towards becoming a society with modern values. Although our tutorial under Gandhi was slightly more difficult tutorial to understand, because even though he was a modern leader in every sense, he was a critical modernist in many ways, something that you can still see if you read his books like Swaraj. That tutorial was long and it led to a considerable and difficult understanding of what Indian society, after its long experience of surviving under colonial rule, was striving for. The Constitution provided a goal, a sense of a direction, and education was perceived in that context as a means of achieving that goal which the Constitution had set. This student, who I remember, her question today, I remember, was studying in this class with the help of a classic that we were using at that time. It probably is still used in many courses of that kind, Social Change in Modern India. M.N. Srinivas. It's a 1968 book. and along with Blossoms in the Dust of Kusum Nair, published just a few years earlier, and S.C. Dubey's Indian Village, and several other books of that era. Social Change in Modern India of Srinivas continues to offer a kind of a benchmark with which we can look at the history that has been with us. We are part of that history since 1960s. The compass that Srinivas offers consisted of these three keywords that were useful for passing BA ML examinations: Sanskritization, secularization, westernization. Without those three titles, you couldn't write a proper answer to a question about how does Srinivas explain social change. And these words are signposts of the time. Today we remember them also as a compass to judge where we are in terms of these three promises of that era. In that context, even though education was not the focus of that book or these other books that I have mentioned, it was a precept, certainly in education departments like mine, that education is a means of social change, that it has the capacity not just to change society, but change it towards desired ends. It's capable of social transformation, and that continues to be a fairly mainstream belief in the field of various social sciences, and certainly in education. But as we apply this word education this evening to make sense of social change and to notice what directions it has taken over this period that we might take into account, at least since independence, if not from before, it's important to spend a few minutes on making some sense of the word education, understanding it. It has a certain demand from us if we want to understand it. And the demand is that we put on a bifocal lens. One of these two bifocal lenses will do the obvious, remind us that education is a concept, is an idea, which blossoms as an experience in the life of people who spend years, some years of their life, especially the early years, benefiting from education, enjoying education, or being part of this process of getting educated. It's an idea. And as an idea, it fills us up with great hopes that it will do this and that it's a empowering idea. It evokes ideals. Since ancient times, education has evoked many ideals of human life. This part of the use of education as a word also must be remembered, that education is a prolonged experience, that it takes many years, and it differs from person to person depending on how long a part of his early life or her life was spent in education. Somebody who has experienced education for barely 5 years cannot have the same depth of that experience that somebody who has spent 20 years of life getting educated. So this is one part of the use of word education. The bifocal lens that I have requested you to wear offers us a second usage of education. Education refers to, as a word, it refers to a system. Whereas as an experience or concept, education has a very personal meaning, full of memories of good teachers or bad teachers or moments of learning, doing well in exam and so on. That's the first part of education as concept and experience. But as a system, we are in the domain of history. So the system has its own history. It's a part of social history, political history, but it has its own history as well. And that history burdens it with various constraints in it, various special features in it, which make education different in every country in some sense. We often feel very angry with the systemic constraints of education. Why doesn't it change? People often complain and wonder. But education is available as an experience only in a system. That is the irony of this subject, that in order to experience education, you have to belong to an institution which has its own history, but which also shares the systemic history of education. If it's a history that began in the late 18th, early 19th century, then that history continues to shape it to this day. There is no way that the system can be liberated from its history, even though quite often populist politics promises us precisely that. But systems, as a system, education cannot be dissociated from where it's coming from. When we work this bifocal lens, we are reminded that what happens to the individual experience depends a great deal on what is taught and how it's taught. The curriculum is so central to it, to the idea that links education as a concept with education as system. And in a gathering of social scientists today, I would like to recall how the social sciences at this juncture of India's independence, and even from before it, conceptualized this field and its role in social change. Modernization was the key word in the role that education would perform. And in the social sciences, modernization was conceptualized as a process that had a certain number of features that were partly universal, but to some extent customized under post-colonial conditions. For example, transition from rural to urban society, from agriculture to industrialization, from tradition to modernity, from caste-based hierarchy to meritocratic society. These were some of the sort of, you can say, unquestioned fundamentals of how education was discussed, perceived in social sciences. You remember old textbooks like Stages of Economic Development, W.W. Rostow. Many countries of the world, many colonized as well as colonizer countries of the world, use it as a basic text in understanding economic history. Several other books can be remembered like that, which make us think that when society begins to modernize or embraces modern values, then villages get a certain kind of goal, and the goal is to become more urban. In fact, over recent past, you have heard how many policymakers have said it's easier to serve the poor when they migrate to cities. This is not just an opinion, this is part of a policy. And how countries in the world are measured is often in terms of this kind of index. What proportion of population is still left in the rural, in the rural world? How many are now in the cities or urban areas? This is seen as a sign of that very important word for to understand the history of modernity. The word is progress. To understand progress, these indicators are used. To what extent has society become more urbanized, become more meritocratic, and has become more industrialized? These are very key terms, you can say, of how, key terms to understand how education played a role in making us become a modern nation, to whatever extent we could so far become modern. It also had a role in this context in another sphere of modernity, namely democracy. That countries which embrace modernity gradually become more democratic. That the citizens of that country become capable of more rational decisions. Capacity to resist populist persuasion. These are all indicators of a democracy becoming more grounded and more substantial. And in this massive, you can say, process of change, modernity itself was perceived as something that has certain indicators in behavior, but also values. A major sociologist, Dipankar Gupta, in a title of one of his collections of essays, posed a doubt about this, saying the title is Mistaken Modernity. Is it that we have mistaken the behaviors associated with being modern as a society with modernity as a set of values? These values across the colonized world derive from the experience of the European Enlightenment, which, of course, these societies didn't have as such. What Europe went through over centuries is something that we learned about, mostly through education. But that idea of enlightenment, at the center of it lies the world of reason or rationality. That idea is what education was supposed to spread. And its offer to society was to change it. We had a guiding principle which offered us the constitutional values, social justice, equality, fraternity. It's time now for us to examine what happened. And for that, we can look at least three sets of issues or problems as they were posed around the 1950s, 60s, things on which change must happen. And by 1974, it was obvious when Towards Equality report was submitted by the late Professor Veena Majumdar and her colleagues, that gender was a very important axis for social change to be measured by. Caste was, of course, already a very major axis in the Constitution, as well as in the wider world of how education was guiding social change. That caste-based hierarchies will gradually get eroded and merit-based hierarchies will emerge, in which there will be opportunities for everyone, including the downtrodden sections, the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes and others. And then there was a question of minorities, that they will become part of the mainstream of a modern India. They will have equal rights, of course, they already had, but that they will feel at home. And this was a special challenge given the history of partition. If we examine what happened in terms of just these three groups, one could take many more, then an interesting pattern emerges. There is no doubt that through the policy of reservation, education could bring about a much wider distribution of eligibility for jobs in the modern sector of the economy. There is no question that as a distributor of qualifications, education worked well as a system. But if you remember the bifocal lens, which asks us to remember that education is also an experience, then the picture becomes a bit muddy. Yes, it offered eligibility on a much larger scale to the downtrodden sections of society through this mechanism of reservation. But how about the experience of the downtrodden sections in schools, colleges, and universities? On a subject like that, perhaps a very quick fast-forward movement can be made with the help of what Rohit Vimula wrote in his suicide note 2018. Rohit Vimula was, of course, an extraordinary student, and how he thought about life and his work in his last moments cannot be seen as an individual's outcry. He said, "There was no urgency, but I was always rushing." Now, for some people, for them, life itself is a curse. My birth was my fatal accident. I can never overcome my unappreciated childhood. Now, these words, you might say, belong to literature and not to social sciences, but they are a reminder, and they encapsulate what numerous studies have proved, that in our classrooms, children from lower sections of society and the tribal groups of India and Muslims don't have an easy time. Huge amount of evidence exists now, collected by empirical means, that discrimination is widespread, not just in classrooms, but in midday meals and elsewhere, educational events of different kinds. So while as a system, education worked for the goals the Constitution had offered for social change in India, but as an experience, it faltered. The Sachar Commission report had something similar to say about the experience of Muslims. For them, even mobility was difficult, not just because there was no reservation, but just as proof that despite equal chances of opportunity in principle or in theory, Muslims were not doing well, the Commission proved. And now let's look at that third area that we had chosen, gender relations. Again, there is simply no doubt that we see many more women today of different ages in the modern sector of our economy, in our institutions, in industries, and so on and so forth. There's no doubt about that. But literature has piled up to remind us that the experience of education for our women is not the same experience as it is for men in their childhood, in their adulthood, and later. That discrimination against women is a common story. In my book, Chudi Bazaar Mein Ladki, I used the tale of Abhimanyu to describe the fate of an educated girl. She fights, she has to fight at every level. Krishna Sopti ji, who wrote the blurb of that book, said in her blurb that if families were told that their daughter has not only a body but a mind, the social structure would have an earthquake. The idea that girls and boys both have similar mental capacities, imaginations, ability to flourish in positive educational environments. That idea continues to be an embattled ground. And when we look at social change from the point of view of education, examine it, education is a normative discipline. It invites us to judge things and not withhold judgment just because we have to be objective. The process of social change, which touched lives of girls, was apparently rather superficial. Let's move on to the rural-urban relations, a classical theme of social change. The assumption was that gradually villages will become like towns. They will have similar facilities, they will have similar economic opportunities, but it was not very clear whether that would mean that people will stop migrating to cities. In fact, migration to cities, as I said earlier, was an indicator that Indian society was becoming more modern. Had it not happened in England, had it not happened in most societies of Europe, that gradually the population living in villages would get reduced and population in cities will increase. And then sometime in the 90s came along the policy, which was fairly openly stated, that it's easier to serve the poor when they migrate to cities. And all seemed to be moving in the direction. If you look at demographic data since independence or before, you will notice, of course, that villages have been slowly shrinking more rapidly in certain parts of India than in others. But that cities are growing, some cities are becoming mega cities, and villages everywhere are either becoming empty or actually diminishing in population. But what happened during the COVID crisis shocked the world of social sciences and not just the world of politics. Millions of people who had migrated to cities with their children walked back to their villages. At that time, it was anticipated that this reverse migration was temporary, that there would be nothing for them in villages, and therefore, after the pandemic is over, they will come back. Since we don't have data, and the census, which is itself a major instrument of modernity, is not available to us for such a long time now, since 1921, that we can't really make conjectures. But several small-scale studies, at least of children, have proved that a vast proportion of children who migrated with their parents back to the village did not come back to their city schools where they were enrolled. The extent of this phenomenon of this post-COVID dropout is not fully understood yet, but it's there. And it makes us question this entire equation about relations between the village and the city. In any case, from an educational point of view, it was a difficult equation to hold. What it basically meant was that if a brilliant child was studying in a village school, his future inevitably lay in a city. That for an educated village child who was talented, there was no future in a village. And so the idea that education is a means of exiting and migrating took root. In the 19th century. It was sometimes looked at as irony. In many African societies also, it was observed and seen ironically, most famously in the writing of Kumar, the African writer who wrote about this kind of journey of a village boy first to the capital of his country and then eventually to Paris, the metropolitan world of French colonialism. How exactly this will unfold for education? Does education offer no way in which an educated person can continue to be in a village? This remained a conundrum and continues to be so, even though at civil society level, many institutions have attempted to question this phenomenon and attempt to retain children who have been educated in a village to see their future in the village. But it somehow looks like something very unmodern to aspire for. One is reminded of Gandhi's critical modernity, which didn't accept that the villages had to go and had to stop remaining a site of Indian society and culture. One measure of social change has been the use of science and technology. Since early 20th century, but definitely after independence, it became a signpost. The scientific temper and the growth of technology. These were two very important instruments of bringing modernity to our society. Technology has its own historical proof to offer how it changed our society. One can go back to roads and railways, buses and cars and so on. In communication technology, one can go back to radio and television and so on. And each of these has left a mark on how society has negotiated changes in its economy, changes in its social fabric, and so on. There's no doubt that the railways played a very important role. And today, when we look at our current technological encounters, we like to think that earlier technologies helped to achieve what was meant to be achieved, and so will this. This meaning digital technology, something we have lived with for hardly 2 decades now. But we tend to look, at least in the world of social sciences and education, we tend to look at it without fear, even though a vast number of reasons are available to us now that remind us that this is not like the railways, nor is it like radio and television. Two major philosophers of this subject, Harold Innis and Ursula Franklin, reminded us precisely that technology is a way of life. It's how we do things here. And with digital technology, we are doing things differently. What is the nature of that difference? In his very recent book, the Greek economist, who was also the Minister of Finance in Greece during its very difficult years, Professor Varoufakis, has reminded us that today we are in that phase of capitalism when we don't understand capitalism. He calls it cloud capitalism, in which the entire world has been converted into service. We contribute to a highly intensified and centralized digital economy merely by using it, by becoming data for it to grow. And this is, to him, a crisis in the history of competitive nature of capital. Therefore, the subtitle of his eminent book, Techno-Feudalism, is Who Killed Capitalism? What will it mean to live in a world in which wealth is so concentrated in the hands of a few global dominant companies, and that national barriers don't matter for them? That is, of course, part of the gift that internet has given us. And the debate between those who are gung-ho about digital technology, techno-romantics, and those who are very skeptical, the techno-skeptics, the debate is just as polarized as the debate about whether India is still secular. I started with remembering a student. Let me try to remember another student. Urmila. I used to see her almost every day in my evening walks when I was working in Delhi University. And gradually I learned her history as a student and as a teacher. She was a brilliant student of political science who had served as a guest lecturer for about 8 years and then became an ad hoc lecturer for another 5 years when I met her. She had never seen stability in her life. Every 4 months, she had to wonder whether she will be rehired. This was the new culture of teacher employment in the 21st century in many universities across India. Urmila was simply an example of that. In the wider economic sphere, a new economy was rising, which we now recognize as the gig economy, which offers no security whatsoever, no job security, no benefits, and so on. And Urmila similarly didn't have them. She didn't even have medical leave. She didn't have the famous casual leave that government of India has offered for the last 200 years. No, she was on her toes. And she often wondered whether she should be given a special dress to be recognized as an ad hoc teacher. Yes, there were thousands of teachers like that in this city, and there still are. There are many more universities now in Delhi than used to be in earlier times. And many of these universities just don't hire people on any kind of permanent understanding. And this is the way it is in many parts of the country. This is the new world of education, in which older driving forces have somehow been compromised and neutralized. Consider reservation, such a major instrument of social change and distribution of opportunities. Today, India has a bigger number of private universities than public universities, and private universities don't have to use reservation as a policy. The bifurcation on the basis of backgrounds, economic, caste, and other factors of background, that bifurcation has now reached a new stage. And whether we recognize or not, at this new stage, education is no more the guiding or steering force of social change. In fact, education itself is being transformed by the forces of social change call them forces of history if you wish, including technology, including political leadership, including our way of life. At the time of independence, those who expected that education will offer a way to mediate social change, to calibrate it so that it works for constitutional goals. That depended on, the success of that project depended on whether education will continue to be education in the sense of a system that will, with self-awareness, improve itself, and as an experience become more pleasant for all sections of society. Education struggled with those two goals, systemic modernization and improvement of the experience inside the four walls of the classroom. But changes since the 90s, in fact, from late 80s onwards, when my student had asked me that pregnant question, education itself has been changing. And education today, as a system, has become actually a bystander of social change. It's witnessing a seismic change in politics, in economics, and in every other sphere of civic life. In the context of the economy, which is of course the driving force of history, as has always been the case, and not education. Education assisted. But in the sphere of economy, we are no more pursuing the goal of creating a market economy. That we always were. The market economy was growing for a while. Today, the best descriptor for us will be we are becoming a market society in which no other values can prevail or sustain for long other than market values. And education, as a system, as a set of institutions, itself has to follow the logic of the market. It was sometime in the early 90s that we began to see televised advertisements of universities on popular TV channels. Today, advertising education by plinth area or by acres on which a university is spread, or by whether it offers air conditioning in toilets and corridors. Those advertisements now are common and staple of our present day institutional life. There is certainly a change to register, and it's an important change to register because it will help us not just to stop anticipating that education should guide social change, but to accept that education itself is being transformed. Unless we save it at this juncture, unless we protect it, education may not be able to perform that role. Consider childhood, the extent to which childhood being the central arena of education has been transformed by the new technological environment, as a major psychologist has called it. Childhood was one category of citizens which was believed to deserve across the world protection. That is what education, that's what childhood meant under modern parlance. The internet has penetrated that structure of protections for the child. Today, a vast number of parents use the smartphone to keep themselves busy and letting the child stay busy in his own world. How childhood will be shaped by the new technology that we are faced with across the world, certainly in our own country, in a rather more gung-ho manner, because we don't worry about it. We are used in the social sciences. We are used to thinking of technology in our stride. In fact, you would be declared a Luddite if you question technology. The naming, stereotyping is so common. Gandhi's long tutorial didn't help us in stopping to think where we are. Thank you.
May I now open the floor for questions and comments, and if you are really uh, very keen to make comments, please make your comment short. Because it would be better if you are more inclusive, we have more people participating in the Q&A. And before you ask your question or give a comment, please introduce yourself. That will be good for us. We are recording this event, so it will be better for us. Thank you very much. So can we? Minute of mic.
Hello, yes. My name is Subhash Verma, and I specialize in the area of perception management. The way we have looked at education and the way I have been working on the area, and not education directly, but perception of education. One of the best definitions that I have come across is education is the ability to meet life's situations. If that purpose is not served, are we clear about our life's situation? If we don't know where we stand and where do we want to go and how much time we have in between, our actions will be ad hoc. Some information on that or some insight. Thank you, Professor. My name is Raj Satru, and it's very hard to disagree with Professor Krishna Kumar on all the points. But if we put India in the context of global developments, most of the countries are going through very serious revolution. But in India, we just see the silence of academia, silence of intellectuals, especially those who have guided us for the last 20, 30 years in university and occupy honorary position. So where should we look to the change which India wants right now? We are economically going so behind. We don't have jobs. If we are not part of the ruling dispensation, this is the only place where you can say something. Otherwise, very hard to publish against anything which says puts India in negative terms. So my question to Professor Kumar is that where these young people should go and vent out their anger. There's no space. The police will catch me just now. This has never happened in India. India is one of the most hard country to say something, which I'm trying to say right now. And number two, Professor Kumar, you might have written in Hindi many books, but the biggest problem with our economists is that they always talk in English. And that's why UP and Bihar and this part is lagging behind. They have no idea how to make money and how to do business.
मेरा नाम देवेश विजय है। मैं इतिहास पढ़ा रहा था जाकिर हुसैन कॉलेज में अब तक। बहुत ही इल्यूमिनेटिंग एक आपने डायग्नोसिस दिया, लेकिन मुझे लगा कि जो लेनिन का सवाल था व्हाट इज टू बी डन, उस पर अगर थोड़ी सी आप चर्चा करते तो बहुत अच्छा रहता। और दो संदर्भों में मैं विशेष तौर पर आकृष्ट कर रहा हूँ आपका ध्यान। एक तो एनईपी के बारे में आपका अपना क्या विचार है और हम लोग क्या स्ट्रैटेजी अपनाएं जो सोशल मूवमेंट्स, ग्रासरूट मूवमेंट्स में जुड़े हैं। और एकलव्य जैसे एक प्रॉमिसिंग प्रोजेक्ट का जो आज की स्थिति है, उसको देखते हुए आप क्या आगे के लिए सुझाव देंगे? धन्यवाद।
मेरा नाम फिरोज है। मुझे खुद नहीं पता कि मैं सवाल पूछ रहा हूँ कि ख्याल है। आपने सामाजिक स्तर पे सोशल चेंज की बात की, वहीं शिक्षा के विद्यार्थी को बताते हैं हम लोग व्यक्ति के स्तर पे वो सर्वांगीण विकास की बात करते हैं। तो मैं सोच रहा था कि उसका क्या भाष्य हुआ है।
दरअसल इन चार प्रश्नों के उत्तर निहित हैं, इसलिए मेरे लिए कुछ कहना आवश्यक नहीं है। ये जो सवाल हमारे तीसरे प्रश्नकर्ता ने उठाया, व्हाट इज टू बी डन, ऐसा लगता है कि एजुकेशन का नाम सुनते ही लोग कुछ करना चाहते हैं। Whereas today's evening we had plans to devote to reflection on education. Education as a means of inquiry is what we were planning to do today, and therefore at least for one evening, bear with it. जब आप सोशियोलॉजी पढ़ते हैं तब क्यों नहीं पूछते हैं कि सोशियोलॉजी क्यों नहीं हमें बताती व्हाट्स टू बी डन? आप हिस्ट्री पढ़ते हैं तो भी नहीं पूछते हिस्टोरियन से कि बताओ भाई आगे क्या करना है। आप एजुकेशन से ही क्यों पूछते हैं? ये समस्या है कि शिक्षा को हम विचार का विषय नहीं मानते, जबकि हम आज इस शाम कम से कम देख रहे हैं कि विचार की जरूरत है, गुंजाइश है। कहां से कहां शिक्षा व्यवस्था भटक कर पहुंच गई है और उसके मूल विचार, many of the assumptions that we had for so long today don't hold. Consider Punjab, for example, when the farmers' agitation was held, a major economist from Pune wrote in the EPW that she finds it very strange that in Punjab there's an agitation against the laws which would marketize agriculture and make it more lucrative. What has gone wrong with Punjab, she said. Instead of industrializing, it is being stopped by its own farmers from proceeding any further. Now, this was a wonderful example of a social scientist so unhappy with her social ethos that she would rather blame society than study it. Those farmers were teaching us something. They were telling us what is happening, and they did it in the means available with their. I think today all these other questions also need to be looked at in that sense. People ask me about where India is going. Sir, an evening is not enough to consider India. It's enough to consider one or two ideas about where we might be and where we are heading. We are certainly not heading in the direction in which we thought education would steer the course of society towards constitutional values. Consider fraternity, on which I didn't have much time to speak. Our social fabric is thinning so much that everywhere it's the police left only to maintain the social peace. And then that word peace is used. It's usually used along with tranquility on India radio and elsewhere. You know what it means. What is that peace? So the question of whether constitutional values are still the goal of the use of education for bringing about social change, I think that question is easy to answer today, that in the market society that we have become, that goal has been shed. So these other questions also, therefore, need to be taken in our stride. And we need to move slowly to understand where things, not just where things went wrong. In the digital age, everybody wants to know immediately where things went wrong. If I tell you, yes, on 4th of December, 1985, they went wrong, you will be very pleased because Google will then answer it with reference to this recording of this lecture. I don't think we can proceed like that if we mean to have an educated imagination, which is the purpose of education, to create an imagination which is accommodative, which is reflective, which permits us to sit back, move slowly, and think. As I said to you earlier, we had the longest possible tutorial on by a critical modernist, Gandhi. No other nation had that benefit. But like children of a nation where every answer is memorized, we memorized his answers. And after the exam, we forgot. I think it's time for us to take stock of those ideas from the freedom struggle, which were so important. It was Tagore's idea, Gandhi's idea, and in the light of those ideas, to reflect on where we are, where we might be if we don't reflect even now. Thank you. Oh, can you please read it?
Any other? Oh, several. So let me first read out a question that has been sent by a friend who's following us online. His name is Hiram Kulkarni from Maharashtra. And his question to Professor Krishna Kumar is, how can we make sensitive, self-centered middle and higher middle class pupils towards poor and deprived people through education? So I think he's talking about more inclusive. How can we make children more inclusive? Let me now, I'll start from here. I saw hand raised lady out there, and then gentleman here.
Hi, sir. I'm Harshita and I'm also currently working at NCERT. I just wanted to know some of your thoughts about digital technology. You said that there's Harold Innis and Ursula Franklin who have said that, digital technology is not like how technology was a few years or a few centuries ago, like the railways. Um, Today, I feel that yes, digital technology can be really helpful. I mean, with respect to the learners or students with disabilities. But yes, like most social scientists or people who are in social sciences, I am also quite, wary of digital technology and where and how it's being used. So I just wanted to know your thoughts. Of course, we are going through this time, so we can't, know for sure. Yeah, thank you.
I think you've answered the question. We are in uncharted territory. Educational theory doesn't offer us guidance at this juncture. Read Varoufakis. Like a good teacher, I always suggest books to read afterwards. And his answers are complex. He's an economist. How to survive in a world in which economic strings are being collected and held so tightly by a handful of people. Inequality is rising in every society. Of course, in our midst, it's also rising very rapidly. And the social fabric is thinning. Political instruments of maintenance of democracy are themselves getting weaker. He attributes, as an economist, he attributes many of these changes to the new world of what he calls techno-feudalism, which uses digital technology to control us all. This is not an alarmist book. It's written by a man who has been a minister and also a professor in many countries. So I strongly recommend that you read him. He will guide you better than I can. This other question about that came on online, I would answer it by reference to my old friend and Hindi poet Raghuveer Sahai, who in his I think sometime in the 1980s published a collection of his short stories, which was called Aadmi Jo Hum Bana Rahe Hain. It was a good title to think about, and it was reminiscent of a question that India's most important policy maker and visionary, the late J.P. Naik, had raised already in the 1960s. And the question was, do we think about the kind of human beings that we want in our society? Yes, it was a question about values. It was a question about character, personality, whether we have reflected on that process. And many later educationists spent time thinking about that. I had the opportunity to work in NCERT with Professor Yashpal, who often wondered about this matter. Are we giving children a chance to stop and think? Rohit Vemula's quote, which I read, also has that very important line. There was no urgency, but I was always rushing, he says. And then, of course, he makes that statement, which is so critical for us to take away from any attempt to understand what is happening. Perhaps, he says, my birth was my fatal accident. If a brilliant student says this in 2018, then I think I have no business talking more about it. And you have no business in thinking that I can answer those questions.
Professor Kumar, it was. Please. My name is Vinay Jha. I am dealing with education for slum children and children from labor colonies. And this is an anecdote from Punjab, the city of Ludhiana, where during the lockdown, we had around 5,000 plus students, all children of migrant labor. And during the lockdown and after, barely 500 of them went back to their villages. The rest of them all stayed in Punjab We ran our schools online with the mobiles that the lockdown parents were having at home. And we ran a system called Zindagi Ki Pathshala, where the children taught some of their uneducated parents. And that, the roots that they grew, is something that I really cherish from those years. And all of these children fell through the educational net because they were too young to reach the government schools. There are more than 1,000 government schools in the district of Ludhiana because both their parents were working. And in spite of the infrastructure. So that makes one wonder when you spoke of the education reacting to the commercial world or to the market forces, where we have placed education. There is a country now that has decided to abolish its Department of Education, which is a very, very loud voice in the world today. So is it that our educational policy and its implementation at various levels being managed by people who are not educated enough or sensitive enough or understand education or have their heart in education? Because if that were not so, then education would have been above these market forces, would have been affecting the market forces, would have been creating forces of correction. So I thought that this came to my mind, and thank you again for your brilliant exposition and your thought-provoking ideas and the need to think, to stop and think quietly, ruminate, and see where we are, see what we have to do, see what we need to do to make education an actual object of social change. Thank you very much.
More older than Professor Krishna Kumar, but in my observation, I'm very happy you started with the word social sciences, because today I am a bit disappointed that the social sciences and the sciences have been given the parity of getting 100%. All the subjects of sciences and social science, people, literature, economics, languages, you get 100%. It never happened when we grew up. And there was a standard. Before independence, our scholars went to London to do PPA course, philosophy, politics, and economics. And they came back with that background and they taught us when we were growing up. Now, there was a philosophical trend at that point of time, but today, very few people are going to study the PPE. They're going on to America to learn technology and upgrade America. I'm very happy with what Donald Trump is doing, getting back the Indians back to India, if they do, because I would like them to come back and serve the country. Now, the point is, when do we stop this trend of parity of sciences and social sciences? Social science is something different. It's something of the mind. And philosophically thinking from the mind and the heart. And the sciences are totally different. And nobody is thinking of social sciences any longer. In a lot of abroad, faculties are closing up the social sciences. So they say they're not, sociology is closed. In a part of India today, closed sociology. So where is this trend going to lead us? Our young people are devoid of thinking. The thinking faculty is closed, especially with the current government also, it's happening. Because they're opening every nook and corner. In Delhi University, they open a lot of little departments. People are studying PhD with a new faculty which is only 5 years old. Students are enrolled for PhD. I was horrified 2 days ago when someone said, "ये संस्था खुल गई है और यहाँ मैं PhD कर रहा हूँ और मैं ad hoc पढ़ा रहा हूँ." It's a bit. This trend is very. I'm very bothered. I'm very bothered. Thank you.
Yeah, just take two last questions. So there are some questions online.
My name is G.B. Bagai. The West is highly modernized, it's highly educated. Why are they all drifting towards authoritarianism? Is it because they feel that the government can only be efficient and good governance can take place just being democratic is only going to be more fractious. And whether it's China or the US or other countries there, and how far do you think this is going to go, this movement towards authoritarianism?
Take one last question in there.
थैंक यू सर। मेरा नाम सुधीर है और मैं सीआई से पीएचडी कर रहा हूँ। और सर मेरा क्वेश्चन है, आपने गांधी की ट्यूटोरियल की बात की है। मैं यहाँ जब गांधी और अम्बेडकर का डिबेट देखता हूँ तो जो पिक्चराइजेशन है गांधी और अम्बेडकर की, दोनों विलेज लाइफ की और अर्बन लाइफ की, डिफरेंस है, इवन कॉन्ट्राडिक्टरी भी है। जहाँ तक कि गांधी एक रूरल लाइफ को एक बहुत ही पॉजिटिव वे में पिक्चराइज करते हैं, वहीं अम्बेडकर उसको फ्यूडल कास्ट रिडन देखते हैं। और अम्बेडकर साथ ही साथ एक अर्बन स्पेस को एक लिबरेशन के स्पेस की तरह देखते हैं। सर मैं आपका इस पे कमेंट चाहूँ। थैंक
यू। Thank you so much for a brilliant lecture. My name is Janaki Abraham. I teach sociology in Delhi University. I wanted you, I think this is something that has come up, but to say something about, you talked about several ways in which education is challenged, and most of all through that very moving, your description from Rohit Vimula's letter. But I was wondering if you could say a little more about what it means for education in a context in which the spirit of inquiry itself is so constrained today. I mean, there is such definite sort of ideas of what we should teach and what we shouldn't teach. And it seems that so much of what we are supposed to teach is about answers that we are supposed to know already, which means that then inquiry, there's no space for inquiry.
I'll just read out very quickly, again, I just, in the spirit of inclusion, I would say. There are three questions here. I just quickly read. In a system that often prioritizes exams and memorization, how can we cultivate true critical thinking in students? This is Mr. Abhimanyu Sharma from SCERT. Second question is, how do you see the Indianization of Indian education as it is prevalent in the contemporary era? This is Moni Yadav. And third is from Mr. Akash. Is it possible to move away from being just market society, a notion popularized by Michael Sattel too? If so, how do we try to begin the shift? These three questions as well.
I'll answer a couple of questions more carefully, but about several questions that I have been asked to respond to. I'll say I'm reminded of several classes I took in my life at Delhi University. And at one occasion, it became very clear that there's something about our field, by our, I mean my field, educational theory, that it reduces itself to just two options in life. Either you become an IAS officer or a journalist. You can be subjected to almost every problem in the world. That's what we have witnessed today. People want to know how to get over the market society syndrome, how to deal with democracy's problems in the West, in America, and so on and so forth. So, with due respect, I would say, kindly let education itself be an object of some reflection today. My goal today was to draw attention to this bifocality about education. That on the one hand, it's the name of a system which has its history. We can't get rid of this history. This question about Indianization suggests as if colonization was just a brief experience of 5 or 10 years, and we don't have to worry about it now. Well, several historians exist, Bailey most famously, who said the modern world was born out of the colonial experience. And on words like modernity and development, colonialism has left its stamp that we deal with all the time. When we make a dam, like a big dam on a river, or when we displace people, that stamp is always there. how we think about people who will be affected by development. These are paradoxes of modernity that cannot be just shoved away in this evening. I know that Google has made us all very impatient about looking deeper into things. Only governments now appoint inquiry committees. Inquiry otherwise is just not possible in a semesterized system that our universities have taken up with the old colonial examination system, so that a teacher is all the time preparing for exams. This is a very, you can say, problematic aspect of the system as we encounter it today. Does it offer space for inquiry? Yes, that's the heart of the question. But to give some solace to the person who asked this question, I would say, in fact, this question is precisely what Tagore had asked in 1910. He said, our teachers never had a single experience of free inquiry. How can they encourage inquiry in children? Tagore's question asked more than 100 years ago. Today's teacher is so subjugated. I have given you an instance of Urmila. I didn't even talk about the school teacher whose subjugation has carried on for more than 150 years, lacking status, lacking any kind of recognition that she also matters to the larger society. We can't work on education with any reflective rigor or depth if we forget about what is happening to the teacher. Look at not just the COVID experience of being forced to do online teaching, but beyond it. Today, the teacher is actually at the mercy of what the companies are creating as content. And if that happens to teaching as a field, I'm sure Urmila is doing the same thing somewhere where she ended up probably getting a job. I'm not sure. But the idea that a teacher cannot apply her own mind and wisdom to create content for her class is a very, very tricky idea. And if we are tricked into this new culture, we have to reflect on and think about how do we walk out of that trap. This is not an easy question for anybody to answer, certainly not in one evening. Many an evening would have to be spent to think about this. And we have had questions about how to restore the values for which education stood, and so on and so forth. None of them is an easy question. We will reduce this subject to a journalistic area, unless somebody can say, look, I am now the chief advisor to the government of India, I'll handle it, don't worry. Which are the two ways in which problems are handled very often. I think we must stay a bit humble about facing the problems that the concept of social change faces. We have all contributed to that problem, and how the concept of education faces. To that also we have all contributed. It's a moment of reflection, introspection, as an instrument of reflection. And then perhaps we will see some light someday. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we really had a real feast today. And there is so much to ponder about where we are going in terms of educational inquiry. And Professor Krishna Kumar actually took us through this whole process of retrogression of education and the education as a system. And what we can, sort of the only thing that we can think about his long reflection is that the brick by brick, the entire system is just coming apart. And we don't know how far it's going to go because we stop thinking about where we are. We can't take the next steps unless we introspect and we think, and this is what he's been appealing to all of us. Because today, as like he mentioned, that the world has become extremely short-termist, and as an economist, I can say that everyone is behaving like speculative capitalists. The speculative capital comes in, and just spends a few moments and then just leaves the country or goes somewhere else, making the most of what it can in that little span of time. So everyone has become extremely speculative. We don't actually think about how education as a system is actually getting degenerated. The one thing that really struck me when he was talking about the importance of the rural economy, that I think, and again, I was reflecting on this, that I think right from the beginning, of our initial days of independence, the idea that Mahatma Gandhi gave us about what villages are, I think in our own quest for modernization, we quickly forgot that. And as we moved on, the entire rural area became a kind of reject. It just fell by the wayside, like you mentioned, that we are talking about urbanization and development, and urbanization is synonymous with development. Now, Gandhiji told us that India lives in its villages. It still does in its villages, but we have we pay no consideration to the fact that it's really the villages. So, in terms of the spatial inclusion, we haven't actually included the villages. We haven't actually taken all that the villages have to offer in terms of making our education system richer and more, I would say, reflective of what we are as Indians. That has become the rejected part of India, and that's the most unfortunate reality that we are seeing today. Now, we really need to think about that as to where our education system is going and what the future holds for all of us. Again, in one way, I'm also thinking about the future, but I think unless we reflect back on the past and see what has gone on and what went wrong, we can't possibly take the next steps. So I would again thank Professor Krishna Kumar for taking time out and sharing his life's experience about education. He's been thinking about education all his life and how education relates to society and how social change can be an object of education inquiry. Thank you very much, sir, and we hope that we'll get more support from you in future, because education is one of our very important areas of CSG's activity, and we'd like to see you more often in the events and our thinking process that we organize. Thank you very much. Now I request Dr. Sushmita Mitra, Assistant Professor, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Esteemed dignitaries, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. On behalf of entire social change team, it is both an honor and a privilege to extend a heartfelt vote of thanks at the conclusion of the 7th Social Change Annual Lecture, jointly organized by the Council for Social Development, the India International Center, and Sage Publications. First and foremost, I extend our deepest gratitude to eminent educationist Professor Krishna Kumar for delivering a truly thought-provoking lecture on social change as an object on educational inquiry. His insights have challenged us to reflect on the intricate relationship between education and social transformation, enriching our understanding of this crucial subject. We are grateful to Professor Vishwajit Thar, Vice President of CSD, for chairing the session and guiding the discussion. A special thanks to Ms. Smriti Sudhakaran from Sage Publications for her address and for
Sage's continued support in fostering intellectual discourse. Sincere thanks to Professor Riaz Ahmed, editor of Social Change, for his thoughtful introduction, and to Professor Nityananda, director of CSD, for setting the tone of the event with his welcome address. We are also grateful to Professor K. Srinath Reddy, president of CSD, for his unwavering encouragement and support. Our heartfelt appreciation goes out to all our attendees, both those present here and more than 100 who joined virtually. Your engagement, keen interest, and insightful questions added value to the discussion. Finally, we acknowledge the CSD IIC SAGE collaboration and the dedicated team behind the scenes whose meticulous planning and hard work ensured the seamless execution of this event. As we conclude, let us carry forward the valuable perspectives shared today and continue our collective efforts towards deeper inquiry and meaningful social change. Thank you all once again. Please collect the lecture booklet as you go out. Thank you and good night.